In the year 3102 BCE, according to astronomical calculations preserved in Sanskrit texts, something profound shifted in the cosmic order. The great warrior Arjuna had witnessed the death of Lord Krishna, the divine figure who had guided him through the bloodiest war in human memory. As Krishna departed from the mortal realm, the sages of ancient India declared that a new age had begun. The Kali Yuga, the age of darkness, the final epoch before the universe would dissolve and be born anew. Across the vast ocean, in the dense jungles of Mesoamerica, the Maya priests were simultaneously marking their own calendars, beginning their long count from a date remarkably close to this moment. Neither civilization knew of the other's existence, yet both pointed to the same cosmic truth. Humanity had entered its final age. This is not a story of coincidence. This is a story of how the ancient world, scattered across continents and separated by languages, cultures, and thousands of miles, arrived at strikingly similar conclusions about the trajectory of human civilization, from the frozen fjords where Norse poets composed their sagas, to the sun-baked deserts of Persia, where Zoroaster received his visions. From the rocky island of Patmos, where a Christian exile wrote of apocalyptic horsemen, to the high mesas of Arizona, where Hopi elders passed down prophecies through countless generations, humanity has always sensed that its story has an ending, and that ending may be closer than we wish to believe. The sage Vyasa, credited with composing the Mahabharata, the longest epic poem in human history, sat beneath a banyan tree and dictated the words that would define Hindu eschatology for millennia to come. The Bhagavata Purana, one of the most sacred texts of Hinduism, contains his prophecies about the Kali Yuga in vivid and disturbing detail. According to Vyasa's vision, this final age would last for 432,000 years, a period during which Dharma, the cosmic order, righteousness, and moral law would progressively deteriorate until it reached its lowest point. In the Kali Yuga, Vyasa wrote, wealth alone would be considered the sign of good birth, proper behavior, and fine qualities. Law and justice would be applied solely on the basis of one's power. Testimonies and proofs would have no certainty. People would become poorer in vigor and bluster, wicked, full of anger, sinful, false, and avaricious. Religion, truthfulness, cleanliness, tolerance, mercy, duration of life, physical strength, and memory would all diminish day by day because of the powerful influence of this dark age. The predictions continue with an almost prophetic accuracy that has unsettled readers for centuries. Vyasa foresaw that men would no longer protect their elderly parents, that people would develop hatred for each other even over small amounts of money, and that they would be ready to lose their own lives and kill their own relatives over trivial disputes. Servants would abandon masters who had lost their wealth, even if those masters were saintly people of exemplary character. Masters would abandon incapacitated servants, even if those servants had served the family for generations. Those who knew nothing about religion would mount high seats and presume to speak on religious principles. Many would profess to have supreme knowledge simply because it allowed them to earn their livelihood easily. What makes these prophecies particularly striking is not merely their pessimistic outlook, but their structural similarity to apocalyptic visions from entirely different traditions. According to Hindu cosmology, the Kali Yuga represents the fourth and final quarter of a cosmic cycle. Just as a bull standing on all four legs symbolized perfect Dharma in the first age, the Satya Yuga, or Golden Age by the time of the Kali Yuga, that same symbolic bull stands on only one leg, the leg of truth, the final virtue remaining before complete moral collapse. The progression from gold to darkness mirrors a universal human intuition about decline, an intuition that appears in Greek mythology's ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, and in the metallic symbolism of the Hebrew prophet Daniel's vision of successive world empires. The mathematician and astronomer Aryabhata, born in 476 CE in the city of Kusumapura, which may have been located in what is now Patna, made calculations that helped establish the precise dating of the Kali Yuga. In his mathematical treatise Aryabhatya, completed in 499 CE, He calculated that 3,600 years of the Kali Yuga had already passed by his time. His calculations placed the beginning of this age at midnight on February 17, 3102 BCE, a date that Hindu tradition associates with the death of Krishna and the end of the Mahabharata war. Remarkably, the Hindu astronomical texts describe this starting point as coinciding with an extremely rare planetary alignment, an alignment so unusual that some scholars believe it was depicted in the seals discovered at Mohenjo-Daro, the ancient Indus Valley civilization site. The Brahma Vaivarta Purana contains a conversation between Lord Krishna and the goddess Ganga, in which Krishna offers a ray of hope amid the darkness of the Kali Yuga. He states that a golden age will begin 5,000 years after the start of this dark age, during which the ill effects of the Kali Yuga would be temporarily suspended. For 10,000 years, devotees would be present on earth, and during this time spiritual awakening would flourish despite the general degradation of the age. This prophecy places such a transitional period remarkably close to our present era, and some Hindu spiritual teachers have suggested that this sub-period of light within darkness may have already begun. Thousands of miles across the Pacific Ocean, in the tropical lowlands of what is now Guatemala and southern Mexico, the ancient Maya civilization developed one of the most sophisticated calendar systems in human history. Their understanding of astronomical cycles rivaled and in some ways exceeded that of their European contemporaries. And, like the Hindu sages, they structured their worldview around the concept of great cosmic ages. The Maya long count calendar, which may have been invented by the earlier Olmec civilization, counted days from a mythological creation date corresponding to August 13th, 3114 BCE in our Gregorian calendar, a date separated from the Hindu Kali Yuga start date by only 12 years. The Dresden Codex, one of only 4 Maya manuscripts to survive the Spanish conquest, represents one of the most precious documents in the study of ancient Mesoamerican civilization. This accordion-folded book, made from the pounded inner bark of fig trees and coated with lime plaster, somehow found its way to Europe, where it was purchased by the Royal Library of Dresden in 1739. For decades it was simply catalogued as a mysterious Mexican book, until scholars began to recognize its true significance. The historian J. Eric S. Thompson traced its probable origin to the region around Chichen Itza, based on specific pictorial elements that appear only on monuments in that location. Ernst Wilhelm Forstemann, the director of the Saxon State and University Library in Dresden during the late 19th century, dedicated years of his life to deciphering this ancient text. Working page by page, he unraveled the Maya numerical system and recognized that the codex contained sophisticated astronomical tables tracking the cycles of Venus, predictions of solar and lunar eclipses, and calculations extending thousands of years into both the past and future. The codex was written by 8 different scribes, each with their own distinctive style, and it contains almanacs that Maya priests used to determine whether particular days were favorable or unfavorable for activities ranging from planting crops to waging war. The final page of the Dresden Codex contains an image that has captivated and disturbed researchers since Forstemann first examined it in the 1880s. It depicts what appears to be a catastrophic flood, with water pouring from celestial symbols and from the mouth of a fearsome sky serpent. Below this deluge stands an old goddess identified as Ixchel or Chakchel, characterized by a large chest, claw-like hands and feet, a snake headdress, and crossed bones on her skirt. She pours water from a vessel while a black god associated with the underworld crouches at the bottom of the scene, holding spears and a sling, with a screaming owl perched upon his head. Whether this image represents a past cosmic catastrophe, a warning about a future one, or a symbolic representation of cyclical destruction and renewal has been debated for over a century. The American journalist and mining magnate Joseph Goodman, working in the 1890s, succeeded in establishing a correlation between the Maya calendar and the European Gregorian calendar that is still widely accepted today. According to his calculations, the Maya creation date corresponded to 3114 BCE, and the completion of a great cycle of 13 Baktuns, a period of approximately 5,125 years, would occur on December 21, 2012. This date became the subject of intense speculation and sensationalism in the early 21st century, with popular media interpreting it as a prediction of global catastrophe. However, the actual Maya understanding of this date was far more nuanced than the apocalyptic interpretation suggested. The Tortuguero Monument 6, discovered at a site near Palenque in Mexico, is the only ancient Maya inscription that explicitly references the 2012 date. The inscription, partially damaged, appears to describe the descent of a deity called Bolon Yocte, a god associated with both war and creation, to an unspecified location on this date. Significantly, the inscription contains no language of destruction or catastrophe, only transition and the arrival of divine forces. Mayan scholar Mark Van Stone noted that there is nothing in Maya or Aztec or ancient Mesoamerican prophecy to suggest they predicted a sudden or major change of any kind in 2012. Carlos Barrios, an Aju QIH or Maya daykeeper from Guatemala, offered a different perspective on these prophecies in the years leading up to 2012. He explained that the materialistic way of life, all the business about economic and social position in the world, needed to change, and that people needed to go inside themselves to find harmony with the earth, with human beings, with their brothers, with the animals, with the plants. For Barrios and many other Maya spiritual leaders, the significance of the date lay not in physical destruction, but in an opportunity for humanity to choose between continuing on a path of imbalance or embracing a transformation of consciousness. The Germanic peoples of Scandinavia developed their own distinctive vision of the world's end, preserved in a remarkable poem called the Völuspá, or Prophecy of the Seeress. This composition, dating from approximately the 10th century CE, forms the opening and arguably the most important poem of the Poetic Edda, the primary source for Norse mythology. The poem takes the form of a vision revealed by a Volva, a prophetess or seeress, who has been summoned from death by Odin himself, the chief of the Norse gods and the master of wisdom and magic. Her name is given as Heitha, and she addresses not only Odin, but all the children of Heimdall, that is, all of humanity, with her prophecy of creation, destruction, and rebirth. The seeress begins by recalling the beginning of time, when there was nothing but a vast gap called Ginnunga Gap, and proceeds through the creation of the 9 worlds connected by the great world tree Yggdrasil. She recounts the history of the gods, including the first war between the Aesir and Vanir, the building of the wall around Asgard, and the death of the beloved god Balder, an event that set in motion the inexorable chain of events leading to Ragnarok, the final destiny of the gods. The Norse word Ragnarök comes from 2 elements, Ragnar, meaning of the gods, and Rök, meaning fate, destiny, or doom. Thus the term translates roughly as the doom of the gods, or the final destiny of the powers. A variant spelling, Ragnaröka, uses the element Röke, meaning twilight, giving rise to the German translation Götterdämmerung, Twilight of the Gods, which Richard Wagner famously used as the title for the final opera in his Ring cycle. The Völuspá describes this cosmic catastrophe in vivid, terrifying detail. The sequence of events preceding Ragnarok begins with a moral collapse of human society, eerily reminiscent of the Hindu descriptions of the Kali Yuga. Brothers will fight brothers, sons will betray their kin. It will be an age of axes, an age of swords, an age of wind, an age of wolves. Before the world collapses, no man will spare another. The wolf Fenrir, bound by the gods in ages past, will break his chains and swallow the sun. His brother, the world serpent Jormungandr, will rise from the depths of the ocean, causing the seas to crash upon the land. The ship Naglfar, built from the fingernails of the dead, will set sail carrying an army of giants toward the final battlefield. On the plain called Vigrichter, 100 leagues in each direction, the forces of destruction will meet the gods in combat. Odin himself will ride forth with his spear Gungnir, only to be swallowed by the wolf Fenrir. Thor will slay the world serpent, but will stagger only 9 steps before dying from the creature's venom. The god Freyr will fall before the fire giant Surtur, who will then cast his flaming sword across all the worlds, setting the universe ablaze. The sky will be scorched, the stars will vanish, and the earth will sink into the sea. Yet the Völuspá does not end with destruction. The seeress describes how, after the flames have died and the waters have receded, the earth will rise again, green and fertile from the waves. The surviving gods, Balder returned from the dead, Thor's sons Modi and Magni carrying their father's hammer, will gather on the plain that was once Asgard. They will find in the grass the golden game pieces once used by the old gods, and in this discovery lies the promise of renewal. A new generation of human beings, Lif and Lifrasir, preserved through the catastrophe, will repopulate the world. The sun will have a daughter who will take up her mother's journey across the sky. The Icelandic scholar Snorri Sturluson, writing his prose Edda around 1220 CE, preserved and elaborated upon this mythology. Snorri was a Christian writing in a newly Christianized Iceland, and scholars have long debated how much of his retelling represents authentic pre-Christian belief and how much reflects the influence of Christian apocalypticism. The themes of moral decay, cosmic battle, destruction by fire, and ultimate renewal do bear striking similarities to the Book of Revelation. However, the core elements of the Norse eschatology, the binding and release of monstrous forces, the twilight struggle of the gods, the cyclic nature of destruction and rebirth appear to have genuine roots in Germanic paganism. Archaeological evidence supports the antiquity of these traditions. The Gosforth Cross, a 10th century stone monument in Cumbria, England, carved during the period of Viking influence in northern Britain, depicts scenes that scholars have identified as episodes from the Ragnarok narrative. One panel appears to show the god Vidar, Odin's son, avenging his father's death by thrusting his foot into the jaws of the wolf, Fenrir. The cross combines these pagan images with Christian crucifixion scenes, suggesting that the early medieval Scandinavians found ways to integrate their traditional eschatology with the new faith. On a rocky island in the Aegean Sea, around 95 CE, an elderly man experienced visions that would shape Christian understanding of the end times for 2 millennia. John of Patmos, exiled to this remote location during the persecution of Christians under the Roman Emperor Domitian, recorded his apocalyptic revelations in what would become the final book of the New Testament, the Book of Revelation, or the Apocalypse of John. The Greek word apocalypsis, from which we derive our term apocalypse, literally means unveiling or revelation, the disclosure of hidden truths about the ultimate fate of creation. Patmos lies off the western coast of Asia Minor, within sight of the mainland where the 7 churches of the Roman province of Asia maintain their congregations in Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. John addressed his letters to these churches, encouraging them to persevere in faith despite persecution and warning them against various spiritual dangers. He identified himself simply as John, your brother and companion in the suffering and kingdom and patient endurance that are ours in Jesus, and stated that he was on Patmos because of the Word of God and the testimony of Jesus. The persecution that brought John to this isolated island reflected the growing tensions between the Roman imperial cult and the Christian community. Emperor Domitian demanded to be addressed as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God, and enforced participation in rituals honoring his divinity. Christians who refused to offer sacrifice to the emperor's image faced imprisonment, exile, or death. In this context of oppression and uncertainty, John received a series of visions that promised ultimate vindication for the faithful and terrible judgment for the forces of evil. The imagery of Revelation draws heavily upon the Hebrew prophetic tradition, particularly the books of Daniel, Ezekiel, and Zechariah. The prophet Daniel, writing centuries earlier during the Babylonian exile, had established the framework of 4 successive world empires that would precede the establishment of God's eternal kingdom. In Daniel chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar dreams of a great statue with a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, legs of iron and feet of mixed iron and clay. A stone, cut without hands, strikes the statue's feet and shatters the entire image, then grows to become a great mountain filling the whole earth. Daniel interprets this as representing 4 kingdoms followed by a divine kingdom that will never be destroyed. In Daniel chapter 7, this same sequence appears in a different form. 4 great beasts emerge from the sea: a lion with eagle's wings, a bear raised up on one side, a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads, and a terrifying 4th beast with iron teeth and 10 horns. This final beast is destroyed in the presence of Ancient of Days, and dominion is given to one like a son of man who comes on the clouds of heaven. The traditional interpretation, shared by Jewish and Christian commentators for over 2,000 years, identifies these kingdoms as Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece and Rome, the empires that successively dominated the ancient Near East and the Mediterranean world. John's revelation takes up and transforms this imagery for a new context. His 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, representing conquest, war, famine and death, ride forth at the opening of the first 4 seals of a heavenly scroll. 7 trumpets herald increasingly catastrophic judgments upon the earth. A great red dragon, identified as Satan, wages war in heaven against the archangel Michael and is cast down to earth, where he empowers a beast rising from the sea, a beast with 7 heads and 10 horns that clearly echoes Daniel's vision and seems to represent the Roman Empire. The number 686, identified as the number of the beast in Revelation 13:18, has generated endless speculation throughout Christian history. Scholars have noted that the Hebrew letters spelling Nero Caesar add up to 660, 6 in the system of gematria, the practice of assigning numerical values to letters. The Roman Emperor Nero, who persecuted Christians in the aftermath of the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE, was believed by many in the late 1st century to have survived his apparent suicide and would return to wreak vengeance upon Rome. This expectation of Nero redivivus, Nero revived, may have influenced John's depiction of the beast. The climax of Revelation describes the destruction of Babylon the Great, a symbolic city sitting on 7 hills, clearly identifiable as Rome, followed by a final battle at a place called Armageddon. Christ returns in glory, the dead are raised, and a final judgment separates the righteous from the wicked. The present heaven and earth pass away, and a new creation emerges, centered on the New Jerusalem descending from heaven. Death itself is abolished, and God dwells forever with his people, in a world where there is no more mourning, crying, or pain. The ancient Persians developed their own sophisticated eschatology long before the rise of either Christianity or Islam, and their concepts profoundly influenced subsequent religious thought. Zoroastrianism, founded by the prophet Zoroaster, called Zarathustra in the Avestan language, emerged in ancient Persia sometime between 1500 and 500 BCE, with scholars debating the precise dates. Zoroaster proclaimed a cosmic struggle between Ahura Mazda, the wise lord and creator of all good things, and Angra Mainyu, later called Ahriman, the destructive spirit who is the source of all evil. The Zoroastrian vision of history moves toward a final renovation of the universe, called Frashakareti, a term meaning making wonderful or making excellent. According to the sacred texts, particularly the Bunda Haitian, composed in the 9th century CE, but containing much older material, history is divided into 4 periods of 3,000 years each. During the final millennium, 3 saviors will appear at 1,000-year intervals, each born of a virgin who conceived while bathing in a lake that miraculously preserved the seed of Zoroaster himself. The third and final savior, called Saoshyant, will lead humanity in the ultimate battle against the forces of evil. The Bundahishan describes how, at the end of time, a great comet called Gotchir will strike the Earth. Its fire and heat will melt all the metals and minerals in the mountains, creating a vast river of molten metal that will flow across the surface of the world. All humanity, both the living and the resurrected dead, must pass through this river of fire. For the righteous, who have lived according to the principles of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds, the experience will be like wading through warm milk. But for the wicked, the ordeal will purify them of their sins in terrible agony. Yet even this suffering serves a redemptive purpose. In the end, all souls will emerge cleansed and ready to enter the perfected creation. After this final ordeal, Angra Mainyu and all his demonic forces will be utterly destroyed. Evil will cease to exist. The earth will be restored to its original pristine condition, free from the corruption that had entered it through the work of the destructive spirit. Death itself will be abolished, and the resurrected humanity will live forever in bodies that appear as they did at the age of 15 or 40, sources vary, requiring no food beyond spiritual nourishment. This eternal existence will be characterized by unyielding Asha, the cosmic principle of truth and righteous order, where the physical and spiritual realms merge into a singular, immortal existence devoted to the glory of Ahura Mazda. Many scholars have noted the remarkable similarities between Zoroastrian eschatology and later Jewish and Christian apocalypticism. The concepts of bodily resurrection, final judgment, heaven and hell, and the ultimate triumph of good over evil all appear in Zoroastrianism centuries before they became prominent in Judaism. The Jews' exposure to Persian thought during and after the Babylonian exile, particularly during the rule of the Achaemenid Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great and his successors, may have facilitated this transmission of ideas, whether through direct influence or parallel development. The Zoroastrian vision of Frasco Careti established a template for cosmic renewal that resonates across multiple religious traditions. In the high desert mesas of northeastern Arizona, the Hopi people have maintained their traditional way of life for more than 1,000 years. The name Hopi derives from Hopitur Shi Nu Mu, meaning the peaceful people, and their villages represent some of the oldest continuously inhabited settlements in North America. Despite centuries of pressure from Spanish colonizers, the U.S. government, and the encroaching modern world, the Hopi have preserved a complex body of spiritual teachings that includes detailed prophecies about the end of the present world age and the emergence of a new one. According to Hopi tradition, humanity has already passed through 3 previous worlds, each of which was destroyed because of the corruption and wickedness of its inhabitants. The first world ended in fire, the second in ice, and the third in a great flood. We now live in the 4th world, and the Hopi prophecies describe the signs that will precede its transformation into the 5th world. These prophecies have been transmitted orally through generations of spiritual elders and are also preserved in pictographs at sacred sites, particularly the enigmatic Prophecy Rock, located near the village of Oraibi. The prophecy of the blue star Kachina represents one of the most well-known elements of Hopi eschatology. Kachinas are spiritual beings in Hopi religion, intermediaries between the human and divine realms, who are honored through elaborate ceremonial dances. According to the prophecy as recorded by writer Frank Waters in his 1963 book Book of the Hopi, the blue star Kachina, called Sakwasahu in the Hopi language, will appear in the heavens as the 9th and final sign before the day of purification. The prophecy states that this celestial being will dance in the plaza and remove his mask, an act that will mark the end of all Hopi ceremonialism and the beginning of the transition to the 5th world. Following the blue star, another being called the red star Kachina, or the purifier, will appear. This entity will bring about the actual destruction of the corrupt 4th world, described in terms that echo the apocalyptic visions of other traditions. The sky turning blood red, horrible creatures walking the earth, widespread destruction and chaos. Yet the Hopi, like the Norse and the Zoroastrians, ultimately envision not extinction but transformation. Those who have remained faithful to the ancient teachings will be preserved to repopulate the renewed world, It is important to note that the specific formulation of the Blue Star Kachina prophecy, as it appears in popular sources, has been questioned by scholars and by some Hopi elders themselves. Jason Colavito, an author who has investigated the history of this prophecy, traced the earliest written version to a pamphlet distributed in 1959 by a Methodist pastor named David Young, who claimed to have received the prophecy from a Hopi hitchhiker called Whitefeather. Some researchers suggest that the 9 signs associated with the Blue Star Kachina show evidence of Christian apocalyptic influence. The Hopi elders themselves have at times distanced themselves from interpretations promoted by non-Hopi spiritual seekers. Nevertheless, the core Hopi teaching of cyclical world ages and the transition from one age to another appears to be genuinely ancient. In 1948, an unprecedented gathering of traditional spiritual leaders from every village of the Hopi nation came together to consider their body of oral history and prophetic knowledge, triggered by signs that they interpreted as indicating the beginning of the time of great purification, including the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which they identified with the prophesied gourd of ashes. This assembly appointed 4 messengers to attempt to bring their warning to the world. The elders sought to address the United Nations, believing that their prophecies foretold they must make this attempt 4 times. Their message warned that humanity faced a choice between spiritual renewal and catastrophic destruction. Dan Kachongva, a Sun Clan leader from the village of Hotavilla, who lived from 1865 to 1978, was one of the most prominent voices sharing Hopi prophecy with the outside world during the 20th century. He spoke of the cobwebs in the sky as one of the fulfilled signs, interpreted by many as referring to electrical power lines or contrails from aircraft. He warned of the corruption of traditional values and the abandonment of the Hopi way of life. His prophecies emphasized not specific dates but moral and spiritual conditions that would characterize the time of transition. The French physician and seer Michel de Nostradame, known to history as Nostradamus, occupies a unique place in the tradition of end-time prophecy. Born on December 14th or 1503 in Saint-Rémy de Provence in southern France, Nostradamus came from a family of Jewish descent that had converted to Catholicism. He initially pursued a medical career, attending the University of Montpellier and gaining a reputation for his innovative approaches to treating plague victims. After personal tragedy, the death of his first wife and children, possibly from plague, he turned increasingly toward astrology and prophetic writing. In 1555, Nostradamus published the first edition of his prophetic work, Les Prophéties, a collection of verses written in obscure, symbolic language organized into groups of 100 quatrains, or 4-line poems. Eventually, the work would contain 942 such quatrains, presented as visions of the future extending from his own time until the year 3797. The verses are deliberately cryptic, mixing French, Latin, Greek, and invented words in ways that allow for multiple interpretations. This ambiguity has ensured that readers in every generation have found apparent correspondences between his prophecies and contemporary events.